Just a note about today's episode, it was literally recorded outside. So if you hear a bird, a chainsaw, a car driving by, an airplane that is fully expected, I am deathly allergic to cats. Lauren has 3, and this was the easiest compromise as a location to record. But if you hear one of those things, that's why. On with the show.
Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast. And joining me in the wilds of eastern Massachusetts is Lauren Roy, developer for both Changeling the Lost 2nd Edition book, The Hedge, as well as the most fun book that has ever been produced for Mage within the last 5 years, Rich Bastard's Guide to Magic. It may be the most fun ever. I just need to leave a little bit of headroom.
Always strive to do.
Exactly. How you doing, Terry? 9 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So how are you, Lauren?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
And you just fed me, so I think under Changeling rules, there's some sort of geesh I'm now under.
Yes.
If that's the figure of speech for what we want to call it. But Lauren is joining to talk about a recently released book called The Hedge, which is for Changeling the Lost 2nd Edition. I thought this book was compelling for 2 reasons. One is just kind of the toolbox approach of Chronicles of Darkness is fascinating because, it solves the problem of everything in the book doesn't have to work with everything else in the book. Mm-hmm. In a World of Darkness game, and it's not uncommon, you're like, well, if we introduce this power, we now have to work with the presumption that anyone could have this power, and that, if Mithras runs into Owl going back and has a fight with Vormos, how is that going to do that? Where in Chronicles of Darkness, you just go, nerd, build your own. But as a fan of having a little bit of meta plot, I like that as kind of the connective tissue. It's like if a pot roast is too tender. I need a little bit of integument to go through it. Before we dive into this, let's do a quick refresher on what Changeling the Lost is. What do you play in Changeling the Lost?
So in Changeling the Lost, you are a person who at some point in your life was taken away from everything you know, from this reality into Arcadia, which is the place where the true Fae rule, do as they like all of the time. They are not human creatures. They are creatures who maybe have sort of seen human emotions and go, oh, maybe I want to try something like that. And that seems interesting. Why don't you come with me? And you come be the flame in the lantern on my desk for the rest of time, because that's a thing that people can do.
And they don't really have a notion of time. And that's the other complicating thing.
And so you were a person who got stolen away to Arcadia, and somehow you broke free. You got out in whatever manner it took. Maybe you were a daring escape. Maybe they just stopped looking at you and you were able to go. And you made it back to this world through this place called the Hedge, which is sort of the barrier. It's an in-between place between our world and Arcadia. And there's thorns in the hedge that kind of catch on you as you go through, and you leave little pieces of yourself there. So by the time you get back, you're not the same person you were when you left. You never can be. And you've seen this other entire life. And the awful thing that happens too is that your keeper, the Fae who took you away, tend to leave a fetch in your place, so nobody knows you were gone. That really sucks, because you were missing and maybe nobody missed you. And so it's sort of that story of, you've done this thing, you've been away, you've overcome this awful, awful experience, and you've won yourself back. So now who are you? And now what do you do?
As Lauren mentions, kind of the key entities that we have in the game are you as a changeling, a human that was brought to Arcadia, was changed in their time there, made an escape of some sort. And in general, you are also probably being hunted. You start the game both having passed through an intensely traumatic event, and there are constant reminders of it.
Yes.
What does it build as? A game of beautiful madness?
Yes.
And that's, to me, kind of a fascinating place to start. Kind of like looking at Demon the Fallen or Mummy the Resurrection. You start out as kind of a, in some way, flawed person, or in some way not whole. The entities that have taken you away, the true Fae, also known as the gentry, the good cousins, the kindly ones, or the fair folk, they are powerful, they are enigmatic, and they rule Arcadia. They have access to mortals through the Dreaming Roads, which are these kind of conduits that go through the hedge, and sometimes they steal people away. They themselves are alien, and this is something that I think Chronicle of Darkness does a great job at. The judges of Duat are weird.
Yeah.
The true Fae are weird.
They're so far beyond our experience.
The Idagum are weird.
Yep. They're incomprehensible, and yet we are writers trying to make them something that you can put into a game.
Yeah.
So that's its own challenge. But yeah, they're strange, and they kind of don't care about our rules.
Yeah, and kind of the first thing you can just kind of steal from Age would be the idea of the true Fae, whether or not they be creatures somewhere in the middle of the High Umbra. They are limited in what they can do by the titles that they have taken on.
Mm-hmm.
That they are defined by their names. Like, we talk about true names in Mage. This is like, hold my beer. I am nothing but my name and my titles. Yeah. And the way one destroys a true Fae is by having them yield all their titles, which would require the incredibly difficult process of either outsmarting them or having them break one of their titles, which would cause them to lose it. So even in this, they're an interesting alternative to, in Mage, what we would have as the Incarna, like these remarkably powerful beings that generally stick to their own realms, that have the ability to go out into the world, but usually kind of go out in the form of agents. So you made mention of the hedge.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? And like, metaphysically, where is it? And if you wanted to translate it kind of into World of Darkness, what would be some of the things that you would be thinking about and comparing it to something?
Ooh. So it's one of my favorite vocabulary words, is that the hedge is a psychoactive landscape. It reacts to whatever you bring to it. Mm-hmm. It is a physical place. You get there by, you can open a door into the hedge. You can open a portal in there. And some mortals end up there by accident, which is not great for them. It can be all sorts of different things. It's not just like a big green bush with a bunch of thorns on it. It can be a wire fence. It can be anything that you sort of, with your experiences and your fears and your anger, so it sort of turns into those things. So it reacts to what it's very malleable in that regard.
Yeah, we get the hedge as the idea of, one way of defining it is it separates the mundane world from Arcadia. It is one of the kind of liminal other places that exist in the World of Darkness, and everyone kind of gets their own.
Yep.
And as is fitting, mages are kind of okay with most of them, but are never quite as good as anyone else is.
What other spots are like it? That's...
Well, I mean, to me, the closest thing to it is either the Dreaming or the Penumbra.
Oh, yeah.
And it's this weird thing between the two. But to me, it is unique enough to be able to replace both. So one, it does map to reality. As you mentioned, there are entry ways and exit ways. And to put it in Mage terms, anywhere you think the gauntlet would be thin is a place where it could be. It could be a graveyard, an abandoned office park, a weird door. Probably one of the most common meme posts I see in the Changeling the Lost Facebook group is like,
this is clearly a door.
Yeah, the gentry aren't even trying anymore. And it'll show like a random door that has hundreds of vines that are coming out from it that's obviously been painted over and is being held in place. It's like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing there.
My husband and I went to Dublin for Worldcon when it was there in 2019, I think, and we spent some time elsewhere exploring Ireland, and we were walking along this river, and I spotted this like overgrown wooden door built into a stone wall, and I immediately took a picture of it, and as soon as I had signal, I sent it to Megan, like, do I go through this?
Yeah.
And Megan responded right back. She's like, I mean, you could.
Yeah.
Good luck.
And there are ways of moving through the hedge. We kind of get two different road systems, and I'm not quite sure how they relate. You have the idea of trods. Now, the interesting thing is, in Changeling the Dreaming, trods are the stable point where the rest of the dreaming is defined by mortal dreamings. Whereas here, the trods are kind of where the mortal dreams get in. Like, they're the points of infiltration, and they spread out from there. And then we also have the dreaming roads,
right,
which can be accessed by just about anyone who's asleep. And along them, you have bastions, which kind of represent the dreaming psyche of a thing.
Yeah.
And a bastion could be a literal watchtower, it could be a toll booth, it could be a sarcophagus, it could be a cave entrance.
Yep.
And again, one of the things that that Chronicles of Darkness excels at, it's like, no. I'm not going to give you an idea. I'm going to give you 12. So you could really take that and run with that. The hedge is a place where time and space kind of behave unpredictably. As Lauren mentioned, it is influenced by thoughts and desires, as well as the states and needs of the travelers. Why do you think, what makes the hedge so important in Changeling the Lost, though?
So it's one of those places that is, changelings themselves are no longer fully belong to our world, and they no longer fully belong to Arcadia. So the hedge is kind of the place where they're the most at home, because it's also that place that's neither and also, I guess is the way to put it. And you also have, the hedges also a place where goblins live there. It's not just a place you pass through. It's there are places to go and things to see in the hedge and people to meet. It's dangerous, but it's also, if you know what you're doing there, it's also where you're powerful, or where you can sort of, once you learn what you're doing, you can sort of take back some of part of the thing that the Fae take from you is your power, right? Your autonomy, your choice, and now you're snatching that back to yourself. And so that's one of the places where you can be like, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. You want to chase me? Come chase me in the hedge. Good luck,
It's a awkward middle for everyone, but it's the awkward middle you understand the most. It's like going like, do you know how many times I was beaten up at this middle school? This is my domain. Come F with me.
Yep.
But as you mentioned, there are a lot of doors to it. As you mentioned, mortals can stumble into it, which is something we don't really get with the penumbra. It's really hard to do it.
Yeah.
Like shallowings exist, but even then, almost never does the gauntlet go to 0, truly allowing you to step in. But as you mentioned, there may be a door, there may be a gateway. It may be the fact that passing through this mausoleum entrance at a particular time is what allows us to go there. And just like the dreaming and just like the penumbra, it encompasses the entire emotional spectrum. It does lean a little bit more, I would say, on want and desire and deception, but everything can be found kind of there. It can be used as a method of fast transit between places. You have entrances and exits all over the place. You can use it as a jumping off point to go to somewhere else, generally Fairy or Arcadia, which you don't necessarily want to do. One of the terms that Lauren brought up was Goblin, which is just kind of a generic term for a fey creature who tends to stick to the hedge, who doesn't have really an allegiance. When you think of the hedge in your head, what does it look like? Like, what is a scene or tableau that strikes you if you were to have your characters enter the hedge? What is a sample one that you would have, maybe for the town we're in or Boston where we're near?
Oh,
what does
gosh.
its hedge, do you think, look like?
Ooh. So Boston, I feel like you could definitely do with all the like weird little old alleyways. We joke that it's a city made on cow paths. Whether that's really true or not, who knows?
It's not
but
untrue.
The streets don't
Yeah.
always go where you think they're going to go. And I mean, I worked in the city for 17 years and still could get myself lost. Now I'm having this theory of my dad is some sort of hobgoblin because he can get into Boston at any point. You put him in a car and on a Boston road, he's going to get you there. I could not do that.
Boston is the only place where I've encountered real-world correspondence paradox where 3 one-way streets intersected.
Yes.
And I'm like, I live here now.
Yep.
There's no way to leave.
One of our highways
And they're all named
is
Delancey
going
Street. I
north
don't even
and
know.
south at the
Yeah.
same time. So yeah, I think it would be that sort of weird twisty roadway, and probably the things that you're catching on are construction signs or like the turnstiles in the subway stations, where I don't know if you've experienced any of those, but there's like the big ones that are taller than you and sort of have those like interlocking turning points. I could imagine like that's a thing that you could get stuck in or stuck on and just sort of, how long have you been gone? We have a song about that, actually.
Large walls of driftwood
Yeah.
or broken down ships
Yep.
or an abandoned factory if you want to go into the fake middle of Massachusetts. I say fake because there's always the problem with World of Darkness that we're not supposed to make up new cities for like Storyteller Vault supplements and game supplements. So what was it, Exeter or something? Massachusetts was a common fake one that we couldn't use. But because of Technocracy Reloaded, they introduced a new city,
Oh.
Hong Kong. They
Interesting.
misspelled Hong Kong.
No.
So I'm like, Hong Kong, that is now my
Is now
fictitious
canon?
city where everything is set. If anyone gives me
Just
think
point
about
right
it,
at
like,
the
yeah,
page.
I understand that they didn't want to have games set in like Sunnyvale or Arkham or something
Right,
like
yeah.
that. But I'm like, Hong Kong, that's that which Mike Chaney misses, Terry shall ride into the sunset. I mean, he's not the editor or anything, but still. But yeah, so it's not just called The Hedge. The kind of the unifying thing is labyrinthine, pointy, psychoreactive.
Yes.
And unlike a lot of places in World of Darkness, it's a weird mix between environmental hazard and character. you could run into an embodiment of a relative that you ended with on bad turns that is beckoning you to make a wrong turn, and that's the hedge. It doesn't even need to be a creature unto itself.
Right.
It could be this weird psychoreactive part to it. You already mentioned that it tends to bend time and space in terms of distances and how long that you're there. There are some places that time passes slowly or quickly. One of the recurring ideas in Changeling is, though, that all places have seasons.
Yes.
And this applies even to the hedge, which I love because we get the idea that, I can't remember what book it was, but it made mention that the dreaming is affected by what remains of the mortal pagan calendar. And I just assumed that there's a certain time where it's like, Christmas time and the dreaming as the one thing. We got Christmas, Halloween, and then everyone just going, I don't know, what do you do during Saturnalia? I don't remember how this stuff works. But we talked about goblins, we talked about changelings, we talked about the true fae. Those are kind of the key denizens, but we were mentioning seasons. And the thing about Changeling is it has a very liberal definition of what a season can be. What are some of those, if you remember any of them?
The one that came to mind when you were talking, that I remember reading it when I was going through the writer's drafts and going, oh my God, I love this, is hockey season. Like, you don't want to meet a bunch of hobgoblins during hockey season because they're going to come at you with their big old hockey sticks, and they've got, their pads and their face guards on, and you don't want to mess with hockey players. That's
another one is the definition of what a season is could go both ways. So, for instance, autumn could be during the autumn, or it could be the time of the reaping of the Cider King.
Right.
And whenever the Cider King is on the throne, by definition, it's
autumn.
And we get the example within the hedge, I think of, what is it, the bleeding artist? Someone who is so cold-hearted that whenever they assume the throne, it must be winter.
Yes.
And these are things that obviously provide mechanical things, but think about what the seasons could be for an area of the penumbra, what the holidays would be and how that would change things and how it changes from region to region. I can't remember what Changeling book, but we get the idea that in Iceland, you have winter and deep winter.
Yes. That might have been the core?
It may be core.
Yeah.
Sometimes I also combine it. So since we are stealing things from a game that's not ours, sometimes I'll accidentally fall my way into first edition as well. So like, for instance, in Boston, what extra seasons do you think could be there? I do like the idea of there being sports season as an interesting one, especially like if you have a race for the pennant or something like that. And now we have seasons that vary in length. I mean, I don't know about you, but in Pennsylvania, we periodically have those weird zombie summers where suddenly in October it's 84 degrees or something like that. And you're like, I don't remember how shorts work. What are now going to be the penumbral manifestations of that, where you have these confused seasonal elementals that are waging war on each other or something like that kind of comes back? Or Philadelphia, Independence Hall, suddenly the 4th of July, that entire week is another season. Mm-hmm. And that makes it easier for us to make our local hedge/penumbra more historically inflected. And that's the one time of the year where you can meet the founding fathers or what have you and get the dish on them or what have you, where every Society of Ether member's goal of eventually meeting Benjamin Franklin, or every Cultist of Ecstasy's goal of one day meeting Benjamin Franklin, or every Hermetic's goal of one day meeting Benjamin Franklin.
I mean, isn't it everyone's? Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Yeah. Even in a single day in Boston, and this is true probably most cities, especially, when your traffic gets really congested and you have that like rush hour, that could be a season in and of itself. And it's only a few hours, but yeah. Not
to lean too much on stereotypes, but I imagine there would be something like a lobster season or a crab season or something that, where suddenly the hedge is just overgrown with these lobstrosities of some, but we could have lobstrosities in the hedge.
Yeah. Oh gosh. We have our tradition up here of they call themselves the L Street Brownies, which also feels like a very changeling name. Yeah. That do their New Year's Day plunge into Boston Harbor, and I feel like that could be its own.
Oh yeah, the entire hedge is now icy, and you have to use the weird movement mechanics from all the Nintendo games where you had the ice level, or something like that. Or it could be one of those things where, like, no, to navigate the hedge on this day without the thorns coming in for you, you do need to just be in a swimsuit.
Yeah. Good luck.
Have fun with that.
Yep.
My recommendation from this is have more fun with the penumbra. And I kind of like the idea of the penumbra being a natural home to mages. Like, people are like, the high umbra is where mages should really make their home. I'm like, no. The high umbra is where mages don't get killed immediately. Unlike the middle and low umbra. That doesn't mean they're necessarily welcome there.
Right.
Literally, Pallas Athena can call out a hit on me in the high umbra. Probably not going to happen in the penumbra so much.
Yeah.
The other thing that we get is, you mentioned goblins and hobgoblins, these creatures that are kind of native to it or have made it their home. What are they like?
What aren't they like? There's a great line, I think it's in The Hedge, it's somewhere in there. It's certainly in second edition, where somebody talks about how a goblin fruit can be both a fruit and a goblin. And that is sort of, if you look at something and go, is that a goblin? The answer is yes. Like, just assume. Just assume that it's yes. They are the citizens of the hedge. They live there, they work there. And sometimes, changelings encounter them and get in trouble, because there's also one of the concepts throughout the game is the weird. And it's just sort of these, I don't know if metaphysical laws that it's fate and it has its rules and it does not like when someone tries to thwart it, but also it rewards cleverness. And goblins operate under those sorts of obscure, the goblins just sort of operate under these weird laws. And again, that comes back into play with the seasons, where if you don't know what's going on and you just sort of walk into a goblin market and are like, hey guys, what's going on here? You better hope that you're following the rules or you're going to land in some trouble.
And the rules of the weird are discernible. Sometimes they will manifest literally through systems mechanics, where it's like, oh, you get dice on this, you lose dice on this. You don't have to pay a cost as long as you do this thing, which is pretty neat. But the thing that I always found a little bit different about Changeling the Lost is it's a game that I love having described to me, but I don't know how good I would be at adding to it, because Changeling the Dreaming pulls from myth, but it pulls from a particular myth. Changeling the Lost pulls from myth, capital M, all of them at once.
Yes.
It is kind of on you to do that. And you make mention of the hedge having goblin fruit, and these are fantastic. And again, the hedge as a book goes through a bunch of them. So it is a place where things are always growing and there are things to consume, but there will almost always be a cost to it. If one were to just use hedge spinning to create food for yourself, it was described as being about as nourishing as sawdust, but tasting only slightly better.
Right.
One of the interesting things about Changeling the Lost, if I were to pitch it on someone, is, as a game, it is a game-long meditation on the notion of consent. Where, like, you make an agreement with the apple tree, and you're like, you will nourish me. In exchange, I need to write you this poem, or tell you about the first person to ever dump me, or a time I lied about who I was to someone else. And it just provides anywhere from a storyteller saying, hey, I'm going to give you this Benny, but I want something later, to we're going to do some character development right now, and it's going to hurt a little.
Yes.
So it's like if therapy involved you being, like, elbowed a little bit. That's what it feels like. Again, another thing that I think we should all be stealing to the penumbra. And I guess the last thing before we kind of just jump into the content of the books is kind of the nature of Changeling powers, because they tie into this metaphysical arrangement, the entities within the game, and the idea of myth and agreement. So in Changeling, we have the idea of contracts. We have Arcadian contracts. We have court contracts. We have goblin contracts. What are those?
They are, wow. That's one of those ones that I'm like, there are all these things at once. So the Arcadian contracts are based on things like crown and mirror and steed. So when you think of those things, what are the properties that a mirror has? Well, it reflects you, and maybe it shows you your flaws, or maybe it shows you something behind you that you're looking at it, so you're seeing something behind you that's a threat, and that's how you catch a glimpse of it. Like, it's all of these abstract concepts that are also that thing.
We have the Arcadian contracts, which are contracts that the true Fae or something like them made with these ideas.
Yes.
And the agreement is kind of mortals are restricted by what they know and can do. We know extra things, and we've traded something away for it. And now we have access to this extra power. And as you mentioned, they're thematically fascinating. There's usually a way to get to use them for free. Depending on what type of changeling you are, you may have an added benefit or a reduced cost to it. What are the court contracts?
So the courts are generally based on the seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And again, it's those ideas of where spring is sort of a celebration and growing things, and summer is the time when, like, passions run hot and it's sort of a kind of a fighty season. Autumn is things get quieter and secretive, and winter is very somber. Those are just sort of like barely even scratching the surface of what all of these things could mean.
Well, yeah, like the association between summer and formality. It is a time of right action that things have come into their fullness.
Yep.
And like the winter is mourning. One of the things that I always liked is, depending on what court is in power, if a changeling like Stronghold is attacked, there are weird rules that the invaders have to follow.
Yes.
And they are amazing. but like, what is the winter one? Like, any huntsman has to be truly sorry for what they did. And since they don't actually have access to human emotion, it is just them doing this weird aping of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's also interesting, though, because like they are contracts. They are two-sided in an interesting way. And I kind of wish the Magic and Mage had a bit more of that to it, where it's like, no, I am giving up this. It is important, and it may not seem like a lot to you, but to the entity that I am bargaining with, this is a fair deal.
Meaning, yeah.
If it weren't, we wouldn't have made the agreement.
Yes.
And that's why it goes back to why the gentry abduct mortals. There's just certain things they can't do. They are incapable of true imagination, at least in 1E. The best they can do is kind of ape other people's stories. And just to be like, what would you give up, despite your seeming omnipotence within Arcadia, to be able to do something new?
Yes.
And that's kind of a fascinating thing. And we get a bunch of different examples of what those courts could be. You said the seasons ones. We have the New Orleans court, where we have, like, what is it? The court of...
Tumbledown Market.
Yeah, Tumbledown Market.
I'm putting my hand over my heart here because I wrote Tumbledown Market.
Oh,
and
it's
got a little special place for me. It was it was coins, right? It was...
Yeah, the Court of Coins barter favors and shady deals.
Yes. And so these were sort of all the different types of people you could find within this huge goblin market. Your powers came from those types of payments. Where coin was very much a straight up transaction. Where shady deals was, who are you going to, maybe knife in the back to get a thing done? And again, what does that cost you? Because it still has that idea of a cost. What's important to you, and how are you going to achieve the thing that you want? I love that the idea, just like the seasons all have different meanings, so can the courts.
One of them we get as an interesting example are the tide courts, the high tide, ebb tide, low tide, and flood tide courts, and the powers and agreements that come with those. So when you're thinking of your area, think of what could my seasons be, what would they want, and kind of theme the spirits in the area to taste. It informs what their powers are. It informs what they want. It informs the agreements that they're going to make. And then the last set we have are goblin contracts.
Yes.
What is a goblin contract?
So goblin contracts are not necessarily themed. Sometimes they're just interesting things that a goblin can do and that a changeling can bargain to get that power.
And just note, goblin is just kind of a general term for a fey creature that doesn't really have an allegiance. So here, we can just replace that with the term umbrood. So they're not all diminutive, green-nosed, large-warded. It's a class of creatures.
Yes.
So a nature spirit, a caryatid, an Arinye are all goblins.
Yes.
Depending on the area.
Exactly. Yep. And there's all kinds of different things that they can do. One of them might be able to get you somewhere quicker.
Blessing of Forgetfulness, Goblin's Eye, Huntsman's Clarion, Lost Visage, the Mantle of Mask, the Sight of Truth and Lies,
Okay.
Wayward Guide. As you mentioned, it's kind of a catch-all.
Yeah.
The thing is, you can learn these, but unlike the other ones, they're like, this is going to cost you a point of willpower, this is going to cost you a point of glamour, you have to break this piece of fine china. Mechanically, goblin contracts are kind of neat because you're just giving the storyteller points.
Yes.
You collect goblin
debt. Yes.
Which I think is Old English for I'm a fuck with you.
Yeah.
And at appropriate times, a storyteller can be like, no, I'm interfering with this role, or I'm introducing this adverse change, which to me is way more fun than like traditional chiminage. Like, so I create this open-ended contract with a spirit of blustery winter. And yes, I can conceal my exit by having an icy trail come behind me. My storyteller's going to get 3 points. I get 3 points of goblin debt, which means my storyteller has 3 points of I'm a mess with you at some point later.
That's exactly what it is.
And it creates that delightful thing of what do you do to get out of the scrape, and what new scrape does that bring you into?
The interesting thing when we were talking earlier about the weird and how, it very much wants you to adhere to the rules or to the terms of the contract. The weird appreciates when you do something clever, but it doesn't like it when you try to cheat it, So it can be something about you're under this thing where the first person that you lay, I think one of the examples is the first person you lay your eyes on when you get home is, something they're going to forget you.
Yeah.
And so you can try to set it up so that the first person you see when you get home is not your spouse, not your kid. If you can do that in a clever way that still costs you something, the weird might let it slide. But if it's just like, call your house and be like, okay, you guys go off on vacation somewhere 2,000 miles away so that you're not home when I get there.
Airbnb the house for the next couple of days.
Exactly, right. Now you're pissing off the weird. And now you're going to get in even worse trouble.
Goblin contracts are cheaper, so they're easier to acquire.
Yep.
I guess the last thing to cover is we made mention of the escape through the hedge, and there are kind of two things to bring up. One, there are areas of the hedge that are very uncomfortable. You have the thorns, which is this area of greed and malevolence. They may be literal thorns, razor-sharp icicles, biting insects, a forest of despair, walls made out of pure terror. They're painful and horrifying to everyone, and it kind of reminds them of their time with the gentry. For humans, though, who might get in there, it's not quite the same, but it will still create confusion, lethargy, and so on. And passing through thorns, you wind up leaving a part of yourself.
Yes.
And it talks about how when you flee through the thorns, when you escape the kindly ones, that is what tears away your humanity. And in its place, that is where the weird starts to infiltrate. But you can find those bits that you've lost
icons,
in that. What are they?
They're icons.
Okay.
And they're little pieces of your soul. And it's that thing of, okay, well, you found this piece that came off of you. Something else has already replaced it. And, however you've patched yourself over.
The patch has been made. A repair has been made. It doesn't mean you're back to your original.
Right. Now, what do you do with it? Do you try to incorporate it? It's a thing that some goblins will happily trade for them. And now you've got, this piece of yourself that's out there in the hands of some goblin. Like, what does that mean? How's that going to come back to bite you? Do you want to go get it? Is it a piece of yourself that you really miss? Or is it something that you can let go? That's one of the cool things is it's like, how do you change when you find those pieces? How do you feel about it? Like, is this like, oh, this is my anger. This is this thing that was so defining to me when I left Arcadia. And now
my resentment for my captor
Yeah.
defined me. But what does it mean now that the hatred is gone?
Yeah.
What does it mean? And especially if you look at emotions kind of in pairs, where it's like, envy led me to do this. Terrible emotions can lead us to great places and vice versa.
Yeah.
How does that work? The two things I like from this is, one, what if every time we stepped into the penumbra, something from the penumbra got to step out?
Yeah.
And it could be a full-fledged fetch. It could be an entity from a mirror zone. It could be a spirit that just, in the same way that the weird has a sense of equity, what if the umbra had to maintain a sense of balance? And it's like, yeah, you can build your sanctum entirely in the penumbra, but something's coming out the other end.
Yep.
That blight, that area of toxic waste is now even more toxic. It is now even a truer reflection of itself. Or when we bargain, we can literally trade away bits of ourselves. And this allows for the transformational visit to the umbra that Mage talks about but never actually delivers. What if in the process of coming back, I lose a point of resonance, or one of my instruments changes, or my demeanor has shifted, or something as small as anything that you can think of as a kind of a paradox flaw, or something that can happen as a seeking suddenly changes. The voice of my avatar is now a little bit different. My specialty in forces has suddenly changed. If you want to make a place weird, part of it is it has to stick with you.
Yep. Mage of Theseus.
Yes. The other thing is that also gives us a justification to increase your avatar. Like, yes, you are part of a greater being, but bits of it are kind of stuck around reality. And we have the shattered avatar merit, which makes it remarkably expensive to increase your avatar rating after the fact. But like, if you want to, just have that be a thing. I like the idea of being able to go into the penumbra and collect a past life that you didn't know about and have that. And maybe it's not you as a person that are being torn up, but your avatar as it goes through the barrier between worlds is kind of frayed at the end, which gives you an opportunity to add a new patch to it or to potentially lose something. I think we've laid down the basic knowledge that one would want to have. Let's go through this absolutely explosively creative text where it's like, it's just me going through going, I wouldn't have thought of that. I wouldn't have thought of that.
The writers knocked this out of the park.
Yeah.
They just did such a fantastic job.
I'm going to say out of its approximately 150 pages, about 2/3 of it is stuff that you can just kind of pick up. Like, maybe I'm not going to steal the section on hedge magic, which is weird because I'm like, hey, that's our word. But like, maybe I'm not going to steal that. But like, we get to the idea of groves, curios, and denizens. So one of the sections you have in here are goblin fruits and oddments, which just kind of do weird things. One of my favorite was the ghost apple. That is a piece of fruit that has been covered with frost because winter has suddenly come. The fruit inside rots and goes away, and you just kind of have this outer shell that if you eat, likewise, you shed your outer shell and kind of briefly become a ghost.
Yes.
And that's just the thing that's there. And
happens.
Why not? Did you have any that you
There's
like?
the ghostly garlic in there. This is where I think Changeling does something like we were talking about earlier, where it's capital M myth. And it's sort of pulling all sorts of things from folklore and fairy tales and things like that. So it is a type of garlic, and when you hang it over a hedgeway, ghosts can't come across it. And so it sort of plays on that, like a little bit of vampire myth, a little bit of like, folklore, but in a very Changeling sort of way. Because I can just sort of imagine, Changeling running through a hedge graveyard, scooping up a big old handful of garlic and being like, yes, I'm gonna get out of here now.
Time for me to make ghost pesto. I'm gonna make a fine aioli out of this guy. I like that because a lot of these really gives you much more interesting fetch quests, even than most games do. Being like, we have a chantry. It has an entrance to the penumbra to it, but again, it's two ways. So we're in a graveyard. We need our ghostly garlic to be regularly replenished. Otherwise, there's just ghost problems. And which is also a fine thing for a story. The regions of the hedge are referred to as groves.
Yes.
What kind of is a grove?
It is a place that has sort of a specific theme to it. It can be just a village full of goblins, but it can also be like, this weird sort of gloomy part of the forest where monsters roam just out of your sight. Or it can be a big old library. Sort of anything. A grove can be anywhere from the size of a room to the size of a town, depending on what the needs of the story are. And one of the things that we based the grove structure on was Damnation City, which is a fantastic supplement for Chronicles. And we didn't bother trying to balance out the various, modifiers. Because fairy tales can be so extreme. And so you don't have to have a place that is like super friendly to you on this side, but then super mean to you on the other, and those equal out to zero. Because
hearth and home can be just nice. And the prison cellar is there isn't a lot of upside.
Right. Nobody's gonna be nice to you there. Because that's one thing that I think Changeling the Lost plays really well on, is that sort of pulling in fairy tales and just sort of kicking them up to 11.
And the framework it provides here is pretty fascinating because in Mage, we have realms, but we never really get good rules for how to do them. And within a grove, you kind of have 6 attributes that add or subtract from appropriate dice pools. So for instance, something can either aid or impede it serving as a sanctuary, as a passage from place to place, as a place to gain or reveal secrets, as a place to be inviting or kind to others, as a place of celebration, or as a place of, I don't remember how you actually use a clot here, because I just remember I'm like, that's just the French word for light. How renowned the area is among the hedge residents and what people will think of it there. And if you just want to go through and turn a given area of the penumbra into asking the questions of, does it help you get somewhere? Does it hinder you getting somewhere? Is it protective? Is it unprotective? Is this a good place to gather? Is this a bad place to gather? Is this a place of emotional comfort? Is this a place of emotional terror? And just kind of adding that. You can do difficulty modifiers. You can add or remove dice, but we get a system. And what are some of the groves that we have outlined in here?
We have one that I really liked, which is the drinking stones, which is, it's this stream, which is, let me find the quote, it's made from the tears of lost dreams. And for lost dreams, forgotten futures, and broken memories, which again, sort of very much encapsulates that feeling of Changeling, like all of that sort of melancholy anguish that you go through. And so these stones provide shelter to people who've lost their way, which, I mean, when you're Changelings, you are the lost.
Yeah.
So it feels like you're kind of automatically like, they're going to be like, okay, you are here. Come sit by me a while. One of those places that kind of gives you a little bit, it's a place to rest and to rebuild your goodwill. So it's almost like you're sort of sitting near this stream and sort of having a moment of peace, which in the hedge can be hard to come by.
Yeah, we have the Ferris Hills, which allow you to create remarkably damaging weapons. We have Kelly's Diner, which is a place of respite where someone with 6 desperate arms kind of slings hash, a great place to kind of divulge and learn secrets. And each of these has a wall of story hooks that goes with it, which is also infuriating as someone from Old World of Darkness, where it's just like, figure out your own. We have Research Hospital number 5, which kind of comes up where you have the wail of shrieking EKG machines running about and insectoid IV stands. So if you want your menacing hospital, just kind of go there. And again, there's a bunch in here. The next thing after that we have are Curios. These are the resources that can be gained. And one of the things that about Chronicles of Darkness is equipment always represents a dice bonus. Where, so for instance, if you're trying to convince someone to let you into a restricted party, even though you're not wearing the appropriate clothing for it, the invite, you could say, is a +4 piece of equipment on your composure plus intimidate roll to get yourself into that. So one of the things I like about it is you can have these wildly imaginative things and you're like, oh, what the heck does that do? Oh, it gives me a +2 on my attack roll. Like you can have both. It doesn't, you can have the two separated where you have this weird clockwork hummingbird that is constantly following you around. And you're like, actually, no, it's really good at helping you distract people.
Yep.
So we're just going to run with that. No reason to come up with something equally weird of it. What do you think is important about making a good curio, or did you have any favorites?
I think when you're coming up with them, that's one of those things is like, what do you need to do? Right. So that's the thing, like what in the moment. And that's one of the things that can be hard about being a player in a game is some people are awesome at coming up with things just like right off the top of their head. And some people are, it's like you're saying, you ask me a question, I'm like, I don't know words anymore.
Yeah, I've never read a book.
Yeah, I don't understand stuff.
Music, never heard of it. How could I tell you my favorite song right now on the spot suddenly?
It's not a thing.
Yeah.
So having that sort of structure, again, of like, what do you need? Do you want to get into the party? Okay, well, how do you get into a party? You know somebody, you know a way in, you have an invitation, you're on the guest list. And so starting there can sort of help you build the thing that you need. And you can also pull in from fairy tales. You know, somebody always has some clever little item that does the thing that they need just at the right moment. And so it's looking for those, or even looking at sort of everyday objects that are around you. Like, okay, how could this be something different and cool? Anything can sort of be a curio. You know, you have a book that flaps open and suddenly a swarm of books, you're in a library that fly at the person who's, you know, that you need to get past, and now they're waving their arms and trying to get around the books. Like, okay, well, there's your curio, you know. Yeah,
book flies.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like is somewhere, I think it was in Revised, we kind of got the idea of perfected items, or items that were the perfect embodiment of what they did. So like the idea that they had was a perfect anathem could not be used to pry open a door, but any sacrifice using this perfected item would be exceptionally potent, or the cut would be so clean that the person bloodletting wouldn't even notice it. And to me, these are all inspiration for curios. So just be like, what did the thing do? Where did it come from? What's the weird effect that would come off of it? Like, what does rust from the perfect dagger allow you to do? Does it allow you to blow it in someone's face to enrage them? Or does it prevent their weapon from ever doing anything effective because you have blown perfect rust onto it? And again, you can either say this is one of the things I love about the Cypher system is game balance is much less of a concern when everything is a 1 or 2 shot item. Mm-hmm. It's hard to balance a game once you've given a character a sword +5. But if I just say This vial contains the distilled vitriol of a scorned mother whose child was taken from them. It can burn through any person who has ever wronged someone. I don't need to worry about balancing it because you get to use it once.
Yep.
If you get to feel like a badass and suddenly you get to slay the father of despair using it, that is perfectly great in my game.
Yep.
It's when you kill the 9th Death Lord with it, that's when I start having a problem. And Curios kind of be like that. The last thing that we have are the idea of denizens, and these are creatures that can be found in the hedge. And these are, again, wonderful and creative. They tie to groves, this is where you might see it, and curios, this is what they may have. Did you have any favorite denizens or creatures that got introduced in this?
I mean, act surprised, I'm a cat person, so there's the probably going to wildly mispronounce this, but the Gatto Buratino, which is a little bit of like a sort of a Puss in Boots sort of character, and, you know, very quick to anger and react and is ready to fight you at any moment. And that's kind of, again, that very over-the-top fairy tale feel of like, here's this character that you just run into and, oh, you've insulted them somehow, and now they've got their sword out. No, what do you do?
I think my favorite was probably their viscosity. Their viscosity is a creature that moves very slowly, that is held inside of a giant vial. Their name is half a page long, and they do not like bargaining in haste. So this is an infuriatingly slow character to deal with. And to tie back to Boston, if we want to have molasses season be one of the things, their viscosity, this could have been a boon paid to them as they attempted to go out into the world or something like that. But they have the ability to very precisely remove memories in a way that is eerie.
Yes.
And automatically kind of requires changelings to make a clarity check, which is a particular mechanic. But the thing I like about the denizens is they list kind of all the contracts that you can make with them, where it's like, okay, these aren't all antagonists, these are denizens. This is what you can learn with them. It's going to cost you some experience points, but they will teach you this thing. And again, now we have goblin debt that accrues. One of the other things that I always kind of wanted to have is where instead you were the contracting entity. So like in the same way that I may make an agreement with someone and my familiar makes an agreement with me, what would it be like if I were the patron or I were the goblin contractor for a bunch of creatures in the penumbra, where I'm going to cede my usage of forces 3 and 4 in this particular area, but now I get to accrue goblin debt that lets me, or goblin credit that lets me do weird things. And I just think it's fun to kind of flip it on the head, especially because, like, what's it like when the spirit of a neighborhood pool has to summon you? How do they do? How does Lauren's wizard get summoned?
Right.
How do you summon the hermetic? What does this look like? What does the spirit think of you?
Five
And you're
things
like,
in a circle.
yeah, you're like, really? Exactly. What does that look like? And again, all of these are imaginative. The systems are close enough that you can really drop them in a lot of cases. We have creatures like the Gentle Void, the Monolith, the Nurses, the Spybird, the Mothwife. And then we get a little bit on storytelling information on that. The other thing that actually just kind of filled me with rage was the section called Interlopers, which was on different creatures that were not native to the hedge and what happened there. And I'm like, how dare you, Chronicles of Darkness, have systems for when I have vampires in my Changeling game? I don't like this.
You got vampires in my Changeling.
Exactly. And I like this because one of the problems that we have is if we look to Changeling the Dreaming's Dreams and Nightmares, it's just like, mages can't do magic here. They don't get it because they're no fun and they don't understand how the dreaming works. And you're like, literally have the ability to bend reality to my will. I'm just saying I should be able to do something. I don't need to yuck your yum or anything like that, but let me do something. And one of the things it has here are recommended systems. So this is kind of, if you want to have mages in the dreaming, what could we do with that? And one of the things it really focuses on is how tantalizing the hedge is. It is psychoreactive. It knows what you have and it knows what you want. So it kind of mentions that when you activate Mage Sight, you always find something. It might be real, it might be illusory. And I like the idea that within the dreaming, oh no, Correspondence 1 will always find you a path. Is it the right one? Who knows? But it's always going to find you one. Mind 2 will always reveal an interesting surface thought. Is it the right one? I don't know. So basically the idea would be you never know if you fail a magic roll. So now Arete rolls are hidden and you always get a result. And you just don't know what it is. But I really like the idea where they talk about, like, it feels like the area is covered in mysteries. And mysteries in Mage the Awakening is a capital M term where it's like, oh, something from the supernal realm is here. And we'll probably do an episode on that.
And I think the other thing with that too, with Awakening, is that's going to play on your obsession, something fierce.
Yes.
Too. Like you, good luck.
Yeah, it specifically says basically any time you indulge a vice or any time you look at an obsession, it is that much harder to tear away from.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the idea that maybe one of the problems of going into the penumbra is whatever your character's crucial flaw is particularly easy to indulge in a way that seemingly seems harmless. Maybe you're a very violent person and you appreciate the fact that you can summon a oniric version of someone you hate and you just kind of slap them around and you're like, I'm doing this safely. What does that do karmically? Am I now building up points of jour or my character? Do I have 2 dots of violent resonance? Is it one of those things that the next time someone bothers me, I need to make a willpower check to deal with that? So again, we can get to a similar place as Chronicles of Darkness systems using World of Darkness systems. Mm-hmm. It's just going to take a little bit of a lift. And that's about a little bit under the first third of what this book is. The next chapter is entitled Locations, and boy howdy does this fulfill. And again, these are places, throw them into your penumbra, throw them into your dreaming, make them high umbra realms, make them mirror zone areas, make them Everett volumes. I don't care, shove them into your games. Did you have a favorite destination and kind of like what it was?
I liked Shimmerain, which is I think the first. Oh, it's the second one in there. It is a neon city, and so Shimmerain is this sort of the changeling ideal of a city, sort of big bustling place, but it's also kind of a sanctuary. And one of the cool places in it is Big Mike's Bramble Bar, and he's this character who's sort of this big protective huge dude behind the bar who he's seen some shit, and I think he's sort of the it's one of those places that you can go and you're getting there through this electric rain that takes you doesn't feel so great if you don't have an umbrella as you walk through the city. But you can go into this bar and you can sort of find what you need, and there's a bunch of interesting characters that are there to meet and interact with.
Where do you think that could fit into a game, and where would you shove that in for Mage?
Ooh, that feels like it would be a really cool Forces realm to me. Like, yeah. I think like that.
Congratulations,
sort of,
we have our first shard realm of Forces finally, because we ain't got shit except for Duizatep. Yeah, the first one that's listed is the Hall of Mirrors, which focuses on deception kind of in a number of forms. And it does it in an interesting way where it talks about the eeriness of when you're standing between 2 mirrors and you see infinite reflections. And it's like, does this mean anything? And to me, it is a fascinating place of false wisdom and consideration. So we get the idea in the High Umbra that one of the locations that you can encounter is the apex of history. And in Revised, anytime you went there, it was this weird psychodrama based on what tradition you were a part of. And I think the Hall of Mirrors is kind of an interesting thing where it's like, it will show you a faulty version of what it would be like in a world where your paradigm were ascendant. Like, okay, the Hermetics have the city of Pymander where things are based on will and ability. How different is that from a text of Dark Academia, where it becomes grand proposals and backstabbing and nepotism and so on? It's like, oh, this is the failure state if you miss. Like, okay, I understand that you're a Kavati and you believe that we need to reunite the material and the spiritual. What happens if that just results in 20,000 years of spirits terrorizing humanity again or something like that? It has a place where people can take up contracts to kind of pick up lost bits. It shows you constant reflections of things that you think have value and kind of just the notion of it being a place of mirrors. To me, it's like, well, any attempt at magical perception is kind of going to go out the window. And it kind of becomes a reflection on just the idea of, so what do you mean? And to me, this is a place of grand refinement of belief, where a character gets to go from doctrinaire to nuanced, or something like that. And again, it's filled with weird creatures. It has a meditation on what it means to have the uncanny valley.
Yes.
Like what if what if humans had to very quickly be able to tell the difference between human and things that kind of looked like human?
Yep.
Like, is there a time when reality was overtaken by, like, were the true fae banished at some point? And fetches were much more common.
Yeah.
And we just got good at kind of sensing them and lost that over time. But yeah, that's just kind of two of the locations.
Yeah, and that's one of the ones where I like how the art came out for it, where it's that person
Yes.
looking in the mirror and all these different reflections of themselves are just slightly different. And I feel like that would also be an interesting way to start off a seeking, too, is that sort of like, who could you have been? What choices could you make? Feels like that's sort of a really good visual representation of it.
I always so I've only played Changeling the Lost twice, and the recurring theme I always have in my characters' fetches is they are better than the person who left in someone's eyes.
Yep.
They were the better mother. They were the more committed career person or something like that. And that, to me, as people in middle age, there is a slow process where as you talk, there's a percentage of what you're discussing that is, this is what I could do. And over time, invariably, it becomes, this is what I could have done.
Yes. Yeah.
And we have a lovely German word for that, Torschlusspanik, which means gate closing panic.
Oh.
The feeling that opportunities are receding as you age.
Oh my God.
And to me, that is one of my favorite parts of having fetches.
I did a story for Hollowed Quartz anthology. I did the summer story, and that was one of the moments that I put in there. Was the character goes somewhere, he's trying to check in on his sister, who doesn't know he's gone because his fetch has taken his place, and his fetch is doing a really great job at living his life and is a better person than he was. And the fetch comes up to him and is like, dude, leave her alone because I'm rocking this and you suck and she does not need you back in her
Not
life.
cool, bro.
Yeah. And it's that I was trying to figure out, how do I do that moment of like, you know what, you're right. You are better at living my life than I was, and you're made of like feathers and string.
Yes. You are made of the ejecta of reality. Where does that still bring us?
Yeah.
One of the other things this section also brings up that I thought was pretty fascinating was what happens when weird places bump into each other and start overlapping. So, like, you break it down into, what is it? The holdfast, the chime, and I can't remember what the third
Lemon?
one. Yes.
Yes.
Kind of, what is that? Because in Mage, we get the idea that realms overlap, but we never get information on it. How do in Hedge?
This is where the hedge starts spilling over into the real world.
Okay.
And it's that at first it's just like this little bit. And if you don't take care of it, if you don't stop it, it's just going to keep growing, and things are going to get sort of progressively weirder and more Fey-like in the real world. And in some cases that can be great, because you can have your freehold can hang out there, and it can be a safe place for your motley to go, because again, now you're in the real world, but it's on your terms. But it also can get out of hand real fast. And there's one of the places in there that is, it's used to be a freehold. Like it's one freehold built sort of on the ruins of another. And nobody really knows what happened to the first freehold. There's some signs around it that are like, hey, here's, the name of this place. And there are also, I think it's statues or sort of figures that are just turned to stone, and it's like, are these the changelings who used to live here, or is this something else? Like, what happened and how do we make sure it doesn't happen to us?
And I love this in Mage. Like, okay, you want to step into the spirit world a number of times in your Sancta. Well, your Sancta is going to start spilling over. And now you can either play this kind of as an office comedy where my cultist and your hermetic are like, I got psychogenic mushrooms. They're growing on my tomes again. You really need to do this. Well, okay. Well, my cocaine just gave me a lecture about why I should do better with my tax return. How do you think I feel about this? And you
Worst trip ever.
It's the worst trip ever. Trip to the IRS. That's a real nightmare around kids. Or it can be, this is the warning about maybe you don't want to build your chantry on a node. In a world where so many people were killed in the Ascension conflict or after the Avatar storm hit, it would kind of be like pointing a hose at a screen door. Yes, normally it keeps bugs and things out, but not quite everything.
Yeah.
And one of the ideas that was presented before is, okay, in this chronicle we go around and we clean up busted chantries. And now we have rules for what it looks like for when that spills over. Is there a way to reconcile it to make it useful? Is this suddenly an area where bygones can live safely again? Or are we just introducing umbral fungus into our town or something like that? And because it's Chronicles of Darkness, it gives a combinatorically complete rule set for it, which is, again, just infuriating. Just frankly, I feel ignored.
Well,
Have you ever seen the SNL Fisher-Price My First Well?
I think so.
So yeah, it's the well for sensitive boys. And at one point, one kid goes, well, I want a well. And Emma Stone's character just goes, no, it's for him. Everything is for you. And as someone who plays World of Darkness, I feel like I'm the kid being yelled at. Everything is for you. But yeah, just kind of that spillover. Or this gives us a system to be like, well, you've hit 4 dots of quiet. This is now following you around.
Yeah.
And everyone else needs
What now are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, hey, part of the quintessence you need to hold open this portal is to prevent this stuff from spilling out. What do? So there's a bunch of information on hedge spinning, which is a pretty expansive system. And this is the one time where I've seen a supplement where it's like, let's make it less. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But hedge spinning is this really interesting system where basically you say, I'm going to take a die penalty, and if I get more successes than I need, I can bank those successes to change the world around me. And this to me is super cool because suddenly my sorcerer or my mortal in the penumbra ain't no rule against mortals doing this necessarily. They suddenly have the ability to do it. I think systematically you need to have head spinning as an ability or as a merit to be able to do it as a mortal. But suddenly there's this other cool thing. And also it does a thing of rewarding games where you're rolling for things you don't necessarily have to because it allows you to bank successes. And I think that's something that World of Darkness always struggled with. There was never a mechanic that benefited you for spectacular success in the same way that being able to bank successes in like 2d20 momentum or whatever would be, or being able to spend to do dramatic edits in Story Path lets you do. Are there any other bits that you think are particularly interesting that you're like, hey, if nothing else, this is a cool inspiration for weird stuff that you can throw in your game that we haven't gotten to talk about yet?
I love that there's we did a section on dream heists.
Okay.
Because I think that can also be a very...
Do you have to play the Inception soundtrack during it, or is that just...
absolutely.
Okay,
yeah,
got
yeah.
it. Yeah.
So it's in the mechanics. Like, if you don't do it, you get
That's
a penalty.
written in.
Yeah,
It's like Rich Thomas will come to your house and stop you. We say we're never going to take your books.
We're going to do it.
This is the one case where we do it.
It's a contract. The Weird doesn't like it if you don't fulfill your
We're
contract.
we're doing you a favor by doing some light B&E.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where, again, I think the eidolons, which are sort of manifestations of when a mortal dreams...
They form their bastion.
Yeah. The things that sort of populate the bastion are eidolons and props. And eidolons can also be sort of the defenders. If somebody is coming into a dream that doesn't belong there, the eidolons are, in some cases, going to be the things that go, you don't belong here. Where'd you
You're
come
not from
from
around here,
boy. Yeah. Like, what? Can you tell me how you got in? Where's your invitation? And so that, I think, makes one of the cool things that could work in Mage is, that idea of going into somebody's dreams. And we obviously have rules in Mage for doing that. But I like the different inspirations that are there in the heist chapter for sort of how to do it. And
to be able to take down Vormos Grand Harvester of Souls, you need their true name to break their wards. It is something they only reveal when they dream of their childhood in Calcutta or something like that, or Kolkata if you want to use the contemporary pronunciation. You have to go steal it.
Yes.
So now they're still quite potent in their own mind, but we never get any information that Vormos is no neuromancer. Yeah. So merely they've gone from we'll smote the living shit out of you and kill you and all of your children to merely very powerful in a death-tinged realm, likely overrun with quiet hobgoblins. And we get rules for that.
Yeah.
So
exactly. And the other one that I thought was interesting, I'm trying to figure out how this would apply to Mage. And comes back, we were talking earlier about the art. And this was one of the ones where, I handed in the art note and I was like, I don't know if the artist is even going to understand what I'm going for here. And then it was great, which is fetches dreaming. Because, fetches aren't real. They're things that the true fae sort of cobbled together out of whatever they could find to put in your place. And nobody else really knows that they're not you. To everybody else, they look at them and they're like, yeah, that's totally that person. But we gave fetches the ability to dream. And what do fetch dreams look like? And so the art is almost like a little kid's art project where it's like yarn and paste and crayons. How do things look when you're using Mage Sight on something that's Not dreaming a human dream.
And to me, the clearest example here is, my request to get a boon from the Incarna of War failed, but I know they enter slumber, capital S, as a spirit. So I use Mind 3 once I'm already in the High Umbra. I'm in that, what does that alien dream look like?
Yeah.
Or what does my familiar's dream look like?
Yep.
Or I have a fetish that contains a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm not using it,
Yeah.
what does it mean to be in there? And as always with Chronicles of Darkness, it is wildly creative, and it will invariably be ignored when we get a V5 version of it. So that's also probably not going to get it. Did I ever tell you what my hope is for Mage 5th?
No.
My hope is that we don't get a Mage 5th. It goes straight to Mage 6th.
Okay.
And the opening thing is, hey, we learned a lot about what the Mage community does and doesn't want in a game from M5, and we think this will be a good version. Just completely act like M5 was never a thing. Or just like act like it was. Maybe include page references to a book that never existed. I think that would be real good. That to me is the best case scenario. Of course, short of anyone winning the lottery. My spouse and I actually had a thing where she's like, we should probably come up with a contingency in case one of us becomes like wildly wealthy. I'm like, I'm not really worried about that. She's like, well, you're going to turn into a monster unless you give most of it to charity. I'm like, is buying the World of Darkness considered charity?
I mean,
so that became a weird moral question I didn't know I was going to have to address. But Lauren, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for dinner. That was great. I got ruffled potato chips. Is there anything you're working on or that's going to be coming out soon that you want to point people to?
I am currently working on incorporating the edits for the Curious Cats of Mal, which is a Realms of Pugmire supplement. It's a sort of the cat kingdom and expanded well beyond. First edition had the monarchies of Mal. And so this is all about the cats and much more information, more details about the different monarchies and some adventures that are fantastic for new players. That is on its way.
Nice. And we'll include a link to everything you've done previously in the show notes, which is to say a drive-through RPG link where it says search author Lauren Roy. So, and if you haven't checked out Rich Bastard's Guide to Magic, please do. Far too much fun.
I love that book.
It's a good, it's a banger. Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Mage the Podcast, where all our entries to the hedge are clearly marked and have curb cuts to meet ADA requirements. The show has been brought to you by its executive producers, who you can join at patreon.com/magethepodcast. First, we have the oracles of the following seasons and courts. Ben Bendelow, Oracle of the Season of Whispering Winds and the Court of Echoes. Buck Gregory, Oracle of the Season of Golden Harvests and the Court of Abundance. Christopher Phillips, Oracle of the Season of Luminous Nights and the Court of Starlight. Guy Stewart, Oracle of the Season of Blossoming Dreams and the Court of Illusions. Jay Widener, Oracle of the Season of Rustling Leaves and the Court of Autumn's Embrace. Joshua Hillrup, Oracle of the Season of Frosted Echoes and the Court of Frozen Memories. Mikhail, Oracle of the Season of Glistening Dew and the Court of Morning Light. Bukuji, Oracle of the Season of Shimmering Veils and the Court of Secrets. Sean Gallagher, Oracle of the Season of Searing Sun and the Court of Flames. The Crew of Erebus, Oracle of the Season of Mists and Mirrors and the Court of Reflections. St. UX Player, Oracle of the Season of Echoing Thunder and the Court of Storms. Jason Vines, Oracle of the Season of Blooming Shadows and the Court of Twilight. And Derek Simsick, Oracle of the Season of Waning Light and the Court of Dusk. Along with Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Brad the Blue, Archmaster Dan Svensson, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Michael Parker, Archmaster Morgan Aran, Archmaster Nathan Weaver, Alex, Alexia, Ambiversion, Anders S., Anon, Badurfi, Berto, Blaze Hibbert, Blake Ryan, Brandon, Bryce Perry, Bubba the Pale One, Chris Blake, Sin Shodas, Daniel Cuppen, Daniel Scribner, Darren Hennessy, David Roy, Dennis Osborne, Eli Levenger, Eric Schwenk, Fraggle Rock, George Lara, Gray Trillic H, Henry Kraft, Hugo the Bog Person, Ia Bull, Jason Duncan, Jason Kennedy, Jason W. Briggs, Jay Gatsby, Jeff Brin, Jen, Jervis Johnson, Jolynn Andes, John Magnuson, Lawson Stuff, Kathleen Halperin, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Chris Kinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Manel Canos, Matthew Prohl, Maurice Hopkins, Michael Creedle, Nabero, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klaymanov, Patrick McNamara, Patrick Mulder, Pax Cow, Rachel Grace, Ricardo, Richard Bat Brewster, Robart the Robot, Ryan Stray, Rob H., Ryan Kendi, Samuel Tobin, Sployd, Sev Nessus, Starfish, Stephen Carton, Steve Wynyard, Thrice Great, Tyler Bryan, Vincent Hamilton, Walter, William Connolly, William Martin, and Wolf Larryson. Our EP shoutout is to Maurice Hopkins, who I assume is the lost great-great-grandson of Johns Hopkins, Quaker, banker, and philanthropist. Johns was his first name, not John, and Johns was his great-grandmother's maiden name. He never married or had any known children, but there was quite a fight when he died, as much of his money was left to philanthropic causes, which his family wasn't thrilled with. He allocated $7 million of his fortune, $150 million in today's dollars, to establish a hospital, a university, an orphanage, and a training school for nurses, and funding nursing as a proper occupation was considered quite progressive at the time of his death in 1873. Maurice, when you die, I hope you're able to endow a school, but for maybe something like ninjas or something. Rather listen on YouTube, search Mage the Podcast on YouTube to find our library there. If you super like this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com or at Mage the Podcast on Twitter. We have a hop and Discord community at discord.me/Mage the Podcast. Mage the Podcast is also on Mastodon at dice.camp/@Mage the Podcast. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform of your choosing or tell a friend about us. Also go to magethepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows. Now go change reality. Bye.
I was curious if we had just done that secret handshake.
Yes.
And it sounded like it was. Yeah. So the single most heartbreaking thing I ever found was a person did fake RPG covers, and I saw one for The Dark Tower. And I'm like, holy fuck, where's this? And it's one of those things where only on investigating into the investigation of the investigation do you find out this doesn't actually exist. It's just some weird art project.
Yep.
And then I found out that there was a The Prisoner, the Patrick McGowan series, GURP supplement, I think. And I'm like, do I need that or do I want that?
Yeah.
And does it make a difference? No. And the answer is no.
Try to remember the things that are in this.
Well, that's the thing that I didn't gain an appreciation until further on, being like, this just came out. Obviously, all of this will be fresh, despite the fact that, like, you handed in the final thing 18 months ago.
Like I never
at the most recently. Yeah, exactly. It is both old and.
Yeah.
But the other one that always amazes me is when I reach out to a writer, like Stephen Michael DePisa. I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about what you did and revised for Mage? Because I thought it was kind of cool. He's like, I don't know. That was 20 years ago. I don't know if I'm going to remember anything. And I got him on the show. I'm like, so Blood Treachery was kind of, and he's like, shut up and let me tell you stories for an hour and a half.
That's awesome.
He's like, there I was in my high school dormitory. 2 Live Crew was on the radio, and I was making myself a milk chug. And you're like, wait, what? What is even happening? Yeah. And he goes, I was so amazed by this writing assignment, I jumped out of my Jenkos and ran straight to I put down my Nokia N-Gage, and I'm like, oh, wow. Oh, yeah, you don't remember any of this. And then he's like, yeah, I misspelled that character's name, and that always bothered me. I'm like, you made it up. You can't spell it wrong.
Spell it wrong.